welcome everybody to the back, and I know they want to do a conversation and some questions. And thank you, Phil. Phil is the dance guru. By any party you want to bring Phil to, people will start dancing. So right here. And by the way, in case people... Oh, and Al, I wanted to mention Al. Right over here. Could you give him a round of applause? It's not easy to create the music for this. And just quickly, too, before we answer questions, if you like singing along, Sunday at 4 o'clock in Nickanies, downtown, there's going to be a Pete Seeger tribute. And there's going to be many musicians that are going to be playing there, and I hope you can come. So please feel free to do that. I want to give the chance to the musicians to kind of gather their things and leave, and then I think somebody, Michael, or who was you were going to lead the conversation. Does that sound good? So why don't you guys, could you give everybody please a round of applause and thanks for and maybe we can have the conversation while they're moving out. So if you guys want to gather your things up and leave, or you can stay here for the questions. It's up to you. It's up to you if you want to stay or not stay. I just don't want to force you to stay if you need to go back. But why don't you guys decide, and you can come up and lead the conversation. Yeah.
And actually, why don't we do that through the house system that we use now?
Oh, okay. The house system, so we can do it through there. Yeah. And I'll be the last one out because I got. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I just want to say thank you so much for coming and sharing with us. My name is Anna Novais. I'm the Executive Director at the Health Department of the Division of Community, Family Health and Equity. And we have this coalition of Collaborative for Health Equity, and we've been trying to talk to our partners about the impact that the society, environment, culture has on our health, about the impact that housing, where you live, where you play, schools have in our health. And those are always very public healthy conversations, where we use all of those big words of social and environmental determinants of health. And we've been struggling to try to find ways to really tell you a story, because that's what we do best. It's telling stories and being able to share with you in a way that is meaningful the impact that culture, that housing, that the environment has. And I couldn't think of a better way to do that than with the triple decker. So thank you so much for sharing with us and helping us to do that. I'm going to take 1 minute to just say something else. I enjoy it particularly because, as you can see by my accent, I was not born in the United States. I came a few years ago. 20 years ago. I am from Cape Verde, and so it really gives me enormous pleasure to have Cape Verde be part of your story, which cannot not be the case when we think about Providence and the triple deckers.
Say Mike? Plus my friend is Lenny Cabral, and he would be very upset if
I believe so. And so I also am glad to have today, in fact, my son, he showed up today. So when we came, we lived in a triple decker. We were on a third floor of a triple decker. And so it's great to see how things change and evolve in life. So, but I wanted to engage really you. And this is your opportunity as an audience and as part of that collaborative to engage with us and discuss and try to understand how do we really address these issues. We heard about culture, we heard about language, the taste, the smells, the food, and how we change as people, as communities, as families throughout the interaction of all of those things brought together. And how does that impact our health? Not just our individual health, but our family's health, our community's health. So what are the first things that come to your mind as you listen to music, but you also listen to words and to a story of families changing throughout times, and the impact of the housing in our health? Because this is your time.
I thought this was beautiful. It made me emotional. The music was wonderful. but I also felt that, and I was born here, and I was born in 1953, and we were taught that, you know, the United States was the melting pot of the world. And then later, you know, I learned that. Can you talk to your mic? That I was taught as a child that we were the melting pot of the world. And then later I was disappointed to find out that we aren't as much of a melting pot as I had sort of been led to believe. So when I saw this presentation, it seemed more like the ideal to me than what actually was real. And I remember seeing Unnatural Causes, and you talked about how the boys came back after the war and folks moved to Cranston and Warwick, but there were policies that were in place that where white people could purchase houses in the suburbs, but black people couldn't, and they were left behind. And so I just feel like we need to think about that as well.
Let me say something to that. I'm completely sensitive to what you're saying about the systemic and institutional ways, lack of equity, racism, sexism, all of those aspects that represent our, quote, more fearful or darker sides, quote, unquote, in a stereotypical way. But I think when we wrote this piece, when we created this piece, I think we wanted to bring out sides that don't often get brought out in the discussion of real America. It's true there was a sort of homogenizing, sort of melting pot that was the narrative of the 1950s. But what wasn't represented is the way in which people work together to form small communities of support and nourishment wherever they are. People create those communities by virtue of their common sense of caring, common sense of goodness, common sense of empathy. And those feelings are enhanced by the fact that we all carry with us the histories of all of our ancestors. And when the depth of that understanding meets the depths of others' understanding, what we have is a potential for the flowering of something much more powerful than all of those things that stand in our way. Is it like that now? No. But are parts of what we discussed evident in our culture today? Yes. There's a great book, by the way, called A Paradise Made in Hell, by a great woman named Rebecca Solnit, where she traces the history of human-made and nature-made disasters of the last 100 years. And in it she finds for 100 years, after those disasters, everyday people, roots people, came together to help each other. And it was only when the forces of order and law looked down and said, this is anarchism, that they tried to put an end to it. People have natural empathy, natural sense of feelings towards one another, natural sense of building community wherever they are. And at times those things are thwarted by the very things that you talked about, fear as well as systemic reasons. But I wanted with this piece to bring out the holy in us all.
And you did, and I really appreciate
that.
Yeah,
thank you.
I just, you know, I wasn't sure what to expect, and so when I was watching, I sort of was anticipating that things were going to start going badly at some point. And so that's how I reacted, and but it was lovely.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I was a 60s person, so I don't want to end it badly.
You were waiting for the tragedy.
I moved to Providence in 1983 and moved into a second floor of a triple-decker. And I lived there for 10 years. And it was one block from the Manhattan Heights projects. And a year after we moved in, they closed the Manhattan Heights project to renovate them. And the Italian families that lived in the neighborhood were selling their houses, and they were changing the lots during that time from orchards to condos, or condo-like duplex homes were being built on them. And people from different nations were moving in. And by the end of it, it really felt like the United Nations. I have to say that we felt really good about it. My parents came to visit us, and there was a shooting on the street. And they said, you're not living here anymore now that you have children. And we thought about it, and we eventually moved to the suburbs, I don't know if it was better for me and my family. I really can't say. I miss the United Nations part of that. I live in a totally white neighborhood. It's really not what I would like from my life, but it's where I ended up at the moment. So I don't know. I mean, there's definitely this feeling of nostalgia for the Hmong family that lived next to us on one side, and the family from the Dominican Republic that lived on the other side, and people from Nigeria that moved in down the street, and our kids played together, and it was a wonderful thing. It was a wonderful experience. I feel bad that we left it behind.
Mia.
The mic doesn't go through.
Thank you.
So one of the messages that I heard really loudly was the importance of proximity to building relationships and bridging differences. And you just spoke about that in a certain way as well. And it made me happy for those opportunities that we have to be closer to one another, and made me think a lot about, to bring it to a policy level, the importance of neighborhood design and housing design in bridging differences and bringing cultures together and creating understanding. But it also makes me fearful of the trends that I see in this state and across the country, and people moving further out into the suburbs and more isolation and more 3-acre lots, and the damage that does to community. So sort of that contrast between the two, and the importance of really thinking about how physical space really has an enormous impact on community, on health. I mean, I've talked for a long time about access to physical activity, access to fresh foods, etc. But I think really this spoke loudly to living close together and how that builds relationships.
Well, I lived on that 3rd floor of that triple-decker for quite a long time, and it was owned by Len Cabral, by the way. And when I was deciding to buy a house, I knew that I wanted to live in a community that was multicultural, because I liked so much living on the south side. I had started out on the east side. I went to Brown. And so I bought my house on the south side, and I do still have the whole world gathered around me. I feel very grateful for that. I have Filipino next to me, German across the street, some young hipsters kind of diagonally across the street, Latinos across the street over there. I have an old age home diagonally across from me. I have 2 single women homeowners in 2 different houses there, an interracial couple. So it's nice, but at the same time, when we're talking about the health of the community, it's still the zip code which has the highest recidivism rate, the highest unemployment rate, probably the highest foreclosure rate. I walk to my little store, but it's really unpleasant for me to walk a lot of places. I don't live very far from downtown, but it's not a pleasant walk to go down Broad or Elmwood to get from where I live to go downtown. So I drive my car a lot. My neighborhood is where the shootings happen. So I'm very, very conscious of that as much as I love about it. I don't have kids. And if I did, I don't know how long I would stay. I mean, I grew up in a small town where I could run outside barefoot and play and be safe. And I think we all want our children to be safe. And I don't see kids just out playing.
So I think we are hearing two sets of issues being brought to attention or to the floor for discussion. We have the whole positive side of social relationships, and that you presented so well, and the importance and the richness and culture and language and music and what makes us unique brings when they are positive. On the other hand, we are talking about social policies, housing policies, that develop and sustain neighborhoods into situations that are unhealthy. Because it's not just unhealthy people, you have unhealthy communities, you have unhealthy neighborhoods, you have unhealthy schools. But while those seem at times very challenging to address, there are also ways to, through policy also, to remediate some of those situations. And I cannot, for example, I think about, you said you don't have kids, I have 4. And I chose to live in Pawtucket, in downtown Pawtucket, Main Street, when I moved from my triple-decker. When people asked me, why would you choose to live there? I used to say, because I want to walk the street as I used to walk in Cape Verde, and I want to be able to listen to Cape Verde Creole when I walk down. And I want to be in my room and have a car go by, and I want to listen to Cape Verde music, which does happen when I am in Pawtucket. And when I walk down the street, people say, hi Anna, how you doing? And when my kids were driving, even knowing that it's Pawtucket, I had my neighbors call me and say, oh, by the way, your son drove by without his seatbelt. And so I had my own system. So those social constructs work, even knowing that we say Pawtucket and downtown Pawtucket is not good. But that is where I raised my 4 kids successfully. That being said, I think about other issues. I think about lead poisoning, childhood lead poisoning. And I talk about that because I remember when I moved in my triple-decker, my youngest son was 1 year old. I didn't know anything, nothing about lead poisoning. In fact, 2 or 3 years later, my first job was at the Department of Health as lead poisoning educator. But so, talk about a disconnect. I live in an old house, triple-decker, that had lead-based paint. I didn't know that until I got my job. And I am a highly educated person. And so it's not always about education. It's about, or even knowledge, but it's about the policies that we can create to either alleviate those issues or to maintain those issues. Back then, we didn't have the local housing policies addressing lead that we have. Today, I mean, look at our lead data and our rates in one city, and we're talking about Providence. So if I was to, don't want to put you on the spot, Jim, but I'm going to do that. Because we are so proud of the success that we've made with lead in the city of Providence. We had an amazing change, and it was not very easy stuff. Not that hard.
It's complicated.
See? He doesn't let me get away.
I don't need the money.
Okay.
We have seen dramatic decreases in the number of lead-poisoned children in the city of Providence. Dramatic decreases. And from where, yet we still have 1,000 children lead poisoned every year still here in the state of Rhode Island, which is way too many given our per capita, the number of people that live here. But we have seen so many dramatic decreases in certain communities, and we're specifically talking about here in Providence. And the work that they have done is a blueprint for the other communities that we